Good morning.
Good morning.
Session 51.
Yes, it is. 51. Let's get right into it.
Last week was a beautiful session. My gosh.
Yes, it was. We started the famous God letter. But before we get into that, I want to pick up a little more information about what KH said about the fact that they were going to be meeting with HPB near Darjeeling. Now, Darjeeling is, as I said, in that little tiny bit of land that goes in between Nepal and Bhutan. And Parijong, I found out that the pronunciation of that monastery is Parijong. There is no F sound in Tibetan. And that's where KH is going to be, but they will not meet there, but somewhere closer to Darjeeling. Darjeeling is in a region that is called Sikkim, Sikkim. And at the time, it was a very rough and very lawless area. We'll find out more about that in a later episode when we talk about one of the chelas who met them, the two Mahatmas, physically at the same time. And his adventure is quite interesting. But it is an area that the British were not allowed to go into. It was too dangerous. And so for HPB to even be there was a very amazing thing. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Tibetan people and about Tibetan Buddhism. As I mentioned, in 2006, I visited not that part of Tibetan Buddhism world, which extends all along the Himalayas throughout all those countries, India, Tibet, Nepal, and Bhutan. That's all Tibetan Buddhism region. And when I visited Ladakh and the main city there, which is Leh, 9,000 feet in altitude.
Pretty high.
What I discovered most was the people were very different from South India. In South India, I found a lot of people who were very content, but there were also quite a few people who were obviously distressed, unhappy, and who were begging or otherwise asking for help. In northern India, there were very few people in comparison, lots and lots of vacant, open land. And it's more inhospitable, so it doesn't support a lot of people. But the people there were invariably joyful, kind, happy, contented. I never saw any sign of distress or worry or concern about things the way I did in South India.
Interesting.
So I wanted to show just a few photos just to show kind of what it was like there.
What do you think you can attribute that to?
Their religion, for one, Tibetan Buddhism.
As opposed to mostly Hindu influence in the South.
Because remember, the Mahatmas don't have any more regard for exoteric Brahmanism than they do for Christianity. It's these external religions that don't teach the esoteric side that they disagree with. And Tibetan Buddhism is the only religion I'm aware of that is really still based on the ancient wisdom doctrine. And not all parts of it, because remember, the Dugpas, that's a different sect of Tibetan Buddhism, and they can be completely different.
And when you say exoteric Brahmanism, that's basically the Hindu religion.
Yes,
and
in general, as it's practiced in India.
Do the other castes, because Brahmins refer to the priestly caste, do the other castes, do they practice religion? Or is it just the Brahmin castes that are religious?
They practice religion, but their priests are Brahmins.
Yes, the priests are Brahmins.
And they have complete control over the people, their minds, their beliefs, their way of thinking, and need for money.
Interesting. And that causes the difference in sentiment that you witnessed down there versus up in the more meditative, esoterically taught culture.
And another thing about these external exoteric religions is that they always require an intermediary. You can't just talk to God directly. You need to go through us. We're your gateway to God, but we have expenses, so we need some money.
Just to add a different little paragraph of language onto this, for those listening or watching who aren't familiar with exoteric versus esoteric terminology, make no mistake that the religions are necessary and they certainly are appropriate for many people. Everyone has different constitutions. Everyone relates in different ways to spirit and to source. And religions are important. The exoteric religions are what Terry mentioned. There's a priest, there's a structure, there's a level of, it's a church system, basically. And most of us know what that means. It's very different than the esoteric types of teachings that are more inner, more hidden, because they're not going to make sense to everybody. And we don't want to water them down. And very, very, very different kind of situation. We don't want to talk too much about the differences, but that's just a very quick little piece to help understand this better.
The Tibetan Buddhists, for example, don't have churches or temples that they are required to go to because they don't need them. They live their religion all day long, every single day.
Very little dogma and doctrine.
So just to give you a little bit of insight, these are just some photos that I took. For 3 days while I was there, I had a driver who would come every day and pick me up, and we would go visit several different monasteries. All along the Indus River Valley, there are these monasteries perched up high on the hills on either side. And it was absolutely fascinating to see the people as we drove and to see and visit the monasteries.
Ancient part of the world.
And some of them were obviously less spiritual than others. And I could tell it in the feeling of that monastery. So here's just one, for example. A couple of people were working on a new house that they were building. Very simple construction, but very, very sturdy, will last for hundreds of years. And here's another photo of them on the roof, working on the roof of this structure or this new house they're building.
How many of you build your own house?
Yeah, man. And his wife, I assume, his partner, are building their own house.
I certainly don't.
This is just adorable. And this was not their child, but this is a little girl that I met along the way. And look at the joy in her face. She's just happy as can be. Another one, this is a father and his little son. And again, they were just totally content, just joyous, just happy. They didn't have much money, you could tell. Didn't matter. They were absolutely in joy.
Things matter differently to them. Different things matter.
Yes. Here's one of the monasteries I visited, and unfortunately I can't remember which is which. Perched way up on a mountainside. And each one was just filled with interesting objects and mostly the people. Remember, the Mahatmas said that they get most of their chelas when they are very young, trying to teach these two middle-aged Englishmen. Their doctrine was crazy as far as one of his superiors. Here, for example, are some of the little monks, the little students who are learning the doctrine from them.
Were all these monasteries active, or were any just vacant and buildings?
No, all of them were active. Mm-hmm. Yes, they all had lots of inhabitants and instruction going on.
That's amazing.
So,
are they public? Can anyone just go and study or participate?
All of these are. Mm-hmm. Oh, not to study, no. You would have to be invited. Remember, KH in our last session had said that Nobin Banerjee's 14-year-old son had just been accepted as a student, as a novice at one of these monasteries. Let's get back to our topic about God. And any of you who are watching this video without having watched number 50, stop right now, go back and watch session 50, and then you will be caught up and you will be able to understand this better. I want to talk about one thing, though, before we dive into that. This is something that was written in the first letter that K.H. sent to Mr. Hume after he offered in 1880 to go to Tibet to be trained by them. And K.H., in turn, traveled all the way across northern India over to near Lahore, which is in present-day Pakistan, to talk personally with the Maha Chohan about this proposition. And this is one of the things he said in the letter when he got back to Hume. So go ahead and read that first paragraph.
Every thought of man, upon being evolved, passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by associating itself with an elemental, one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. We should probably read it one more time. Every thought. So this is a thought form of man upon being evolved, meaning when you think a thought, the thought itself passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity. It's not physical, but it's an entity. One of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. Okay.
We've talked about elementals.
Yes.
He's mentioned many times there is nothing in the universe that exists that has any bit of consciousness that isn't animated by these elementals. They are nature. They are the inner side of the physical things that we see. And if you learn how to work with them, and it can be very dangerous because they're similar to wild animals. If you know much about working with wild animals, even if you work with them for many years, that can all go wrong in an instant. We know
Yes.
the two performers in Las Vegas, Siegfried and Roy, worked for decades with wild animals in their magic show on the Strip. And then one night in 2003, one of their white tigers, when Roy put the microphone in front of him and asked him if he wanted to say anything, got annoyed and grabbed his sleeve of his costume. And so Roy tapped it on the snout with the microphone, and that angered the tiger, and he attacked him on stage and dragged him off, and that was the end of their career. He crushed his spine. He never regained his health or even his mental ability because it also bit his neck. He suffered a stroke. He had mental problems and serious physical problems, and that was the end of their career. So elementals are the same way, and Subarao found that out. You have to be very careful. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be absolutely pure, because if they feel that you have any anger or ill feelings towards them, they can turn on you.
This is a clue that we haven't mentioned much. There are phenomena that exist. We have discussed the phenomena, which might seem like magic, but Terry mentioned if you work with the elementals, we can produce experiences that might seem like magic. And this is a clue as to how it's done. It's working with the nature spirits, the spirits of the natural world, but not the physical world. When you can work with these elementals, that's how these seemingly impossible feats are accomplished.
Any people who are working with spells, and quite often they're spells to curse people, you're working with elementals and you are playing with fire. So if you feel tempted to cast a spell to injure someone, be advised that you are the one that is most likely to be injured.
Continuing along, it survives, meaning the thought form animated by an elemental, it survives as an active intelligence on its own, a creature of the mind's begetting, for a longer or shorter period proportionate to the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. In other words, the clarity and strength of your mind producing the thought determines its potency, its lifespan, its effectiveness. And this is for anybody, anywhere, anytime who thinks any thought. If it's just a random thought, it doesn't have much power. But if you focus on this, like a spell, Terry was saying, if you obsess, that's a powerful thought. Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. I'll make another comment here. We've said before that common characters in culture, like Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, ghostly things that we think about at Halloween too, these forms that are created are not only created by one person, obviously, they're created by billions of people and fed and strengthened. So imagine the type of power that those thoughts, if you have a thought of the tooth fairy, for example, obviously the tooth fairy isn't anywhere that you can touch, but there's something that exists that people give power to.
Those are like crowdsourced thoughts.
There you go.
They're huge, they're gigantic, and anyone can tap into those. Whenever they're thinking of the subject, they unknowingly tap into that. And whatever sensitivity they have, they're going to pick up on the thought form that has been created by millions of people.
Now, don't think that this is like doom and gloom. This also relates to prayers. The power of prayer is the exact same process. When a group of people are praying or meditating or chanting a mantra, it's the same thing. There's power there for beneficent power or maleficent, demonic power. Okay, we'll continue. Man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offspring of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions, a current which reacts upon any sensitive organism, this is what Terry just said, which comes in contact with it in proportion to its dynamic intensity. This is amazing. The Buddhists call this his skandha. We've heard that before. We've mentioned that term before. The Hindu gives it the name of karma. The adept evolves these shapes consciously. Other men throw them off unconsciously.
So all day long, we're throwing out these thoughts, or we're tuning into someone else's thought forms, either by watching a video on YouTube or just by thinking a thought. We're connecting with these other people.
The term skandha, just very quickly, it is similar to karma in a way. Skandhas are habitual thought forms and energies that we perpetuate. It's your aura. It's what you're attracted to and repelled by, similar to the way karma works.
And it changes constantly throughout your life. What your skandhas are at the end of this life will be quite different from what you started out with as an infant.
From the very first letter? That was from the very first?
The first one to Hume.
Okay.
So it was right at the very beginning of the series of letters. But he found it important enough to stress how thoughts affect other people and us. HPB in the Key to Theosophy said that we create more karma by our thoughts than by anything else, even by actions, because we're thinking all day long. And that creates an enormous amount of karma, either positive or negative karma.
And thoughts are not bounded by space and time the same way actions are. That's why thoughts can be even more powerful. We have several sections in our book that elaborates this further if you would like to read our sections on the power of thoughts in our Ancient Wisdom book.
So, if you sit and brood all day long and throw out negative energy to people that you hate, think about it. As we mentioned before, thinking hateful thoughts is like taking poison and hoping that it's going to kill the person that you hate. You're the one that's going to die from it. And it absolutely can shorten your life, make your life more miserable, and in the end, kill you earlier than you would normally die. Let's get into our letter, but before we do that, I want to read a couple of things that we have in addition to this letter about God. This first one is from the book that I mentioned a couple of sessions ago, The Letters of H.P. Blavatsky, Volume 1, where she was writing to her aunt in Odessa, and her aunt was extremely religious. They belonged to the Russian Orthodox Church, and HPB also was quite religious when she was young. As we know, she knows the Bible backwards and forwards. And she's trying to explain very carefully to her aunt what her beliefs are now that she has studied for several years. And at this point, it was about 20 years that she had studied on her own and with the Mahatmas. So she's explaining to them what her beliefs are now with regard to Christianity, and they mesh 100% with the views of the Mahatmas.
My master has the same reverence for Jesus of Nazareth as for Gautama of Kapilavastu, but he does not look on either of them as gods. He regards them both as simply mortals and worships the spirit of Christ and the spirit of Buddha in the same way, realizing that both are identical, both are particles of the one great divinity. And remember, the masters are Buddhists.
Yes, but they revere Christ just as highly. Both of them are high individuals in the spiritual hierarchy. The Buddha and the Christ are both high up in the spiritual hierarchy. They absolutely recognize that.
We refer to those as titles or offices being held, or kind of ranks in the leadership of the world rather than people. The Christ, Jesus held the title, maybe he still does. Jesus was a person. The Christ is a title, just like Buddha is a rank or a title or a level of consciousness.
Right, exactly.
And Siddhartha Gautama, he's referring to Siddhartha, right?
Yes. There are other Buddhas. Siddhartha isn't the only one.
But Gautama of Kapilavastu is the Buddha that we know.
Right.
Okay. All the rest, dogmas and rules, are purely human. If we behaved as Christ and the Buddha behaved, when embodied as two mortal men, we and any of us would become like Christ and Buddha, namely united and blended with the Christ-Buddha principle in us, with our immortal spirit. That's amazing.
So simple. It's who we are. They revere both of them. What they don't revere are the people who have twisted their teachings to use them in order to manipulate people and to extort money from them.
We say something very similar to this all the time, and we kind of make light of the bumper sticker that says WWJD. This is a little bit lighthearted and humorous, but some of you might have seen the bumper sticker. I haven't seen it in years, but it stands for What Would Jesus Do? WWJD. What we're hearing here is if we behave as Christ and the Buddha behaved, we and anyone would become like them. How would they act in any given situation? Well, those are clues as to how we might act in order to walk a spiritual path.
And you might notice that many of the people who claim to follow Jesus don't really follow him. I remember seeing another bumper sticker that said, Jesus, protect me from your followers. That's the one that I kind of relate to.
Oh my goodness.
Now, this is one that we did cover before. Remember back in 1881, in 1881, the two Englishmen received instructions from the Maha Chohan. And this was from a transcript that KH had written out, synthesizing what the Maha Chohan said with regard to the information that was being shared with these two Englishmen.
Mystical Christianity, that is to say, that Christianity which teaches self-redemption through one's own seventh principle, which is the highest aspect of ourselves, this liberated Paramatma or Ogoides, which is called by some Christ, by others Buddha, and equivalent to regeneration or rebirth in spirit, will be found to be the same truth as the nirvana of mystical Buddhism. All of us have to get rid of our own ego, the illusory apparent self, to recognize our true self in a transcendental divine life. That's a general, basic spiritual concept that we hope that everyone is kind of aware of, that we need to get rid of the lower nature. Yes, our personalities are important, but that's not us. We have to remember that we are a spirit temporarily occupying these vehicles to gain experience in the world.
So we need to disassociate our sense of self from our personality and associate it with our higher self. Mm-hmm. This personality is nothing more than a vehicle for the higher self to gain more experience.
Exactly.
Nothing else. Nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only mission of that personality.
But if we would not be selfish, we must strive to make other people see that truth, to recognize the reality of that transcendental self, the Bodhi, the Christ or God of every preacher. This is why even exoteric Buddhism is the surest path to lead men toward the one esoteric truth.
And what he means by that is it doesn't require any intermediary.
No priest or bishop.
You can learn the doctrine on your own and practice it, and it will lead you to the truth.
He's kind of saying right there, though, that if you are going to do a religion, it sounds like he's saying even exoteric Buddhism is the surest path to lead men towards the one inner truth.
Yes, because the other major religions, and Buddhism is not among the 3 top religions in the world, but the major religions all magnify and glorify this physical world around us. Buddhism does not. It focuses on the higher aspect of spiritual being.
Even the exoteric one, a version of it for the masses,
yes.
Saying. As we find the world now, whether Christian, Muslim, or pagan, justice is disregarded and honor and mercy both are flung into the winds.
Yes, so there you have it. You have HPB's and the Mahatmas' views on Christianity, and they're very, very positive as long as you're talking about the Christ and Jesus and those very pure teachings. Everything else crumbles because it starts devolving into something else. Greed, selfishness, retribution, revenge. Those are not part of the spiritual path except learning what to avoid.
You know, I hear objections sometimes to our teachings, as to be expected. And one of the biggest objections to this yoga philosophy is the fear of not accepting Jesus as our one savior and going to hell. That's a fear some people have. Do you know if Jesus himself spoke about that? He said he is the way. He probably did say those words, that he is. But did he ever imply that you're going to go to hell if you don't do certain things? I wonder if he ever implied that.
There are a few, but we have to be careful because what we know about the Buddha, we have plenty of things that were written at the time that he lived and very soon after. We have no writings about the life of Jesus that are less than 30 years after he died.
And what he actually said and
so
preached.
Even those, you have to be very careful. Who is going to remember 30 years later what he actually said and not have it affected by one's personal viewpoints?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So you have to be extremely perceptive is what we're saying in order to pick out what is legitimate of the New Testament even, and what could have been added by whoever happened to write it. Use your intuition. That is your safest guide. Your higher self knows. It knows the truth. The more you get in touch with it, the better off you are and the more accurate you're going to be. Let's pick up now on our letter number 88. We are on the section where he's going to start talking about their own views. He talked previously about what they sort of believe in, but just a general overview. Now he's going to get a little more into detail. And the first section he's going to cover is universal mind.
Okay, the universal mind. A few reflections and arguments ought to support every new idea. For instance, we are sure to be taken to task for the following apparent contradictions. 1. We deny the existence of a thinking, conscious God on the grounds that such a God must either be conditioned, limited, and subject to change, therefore not infinite. Or 2. If he is represented to us as an eternal, unchangeable, and independent being, with not a particle of matter in him, then we answer that it is not a being, but an immutable, blind principle, a law. And yet they will say, well, you believe in Dhyan Chohans or planetary spirits and endow them with a universal mind, and this must be explained. And this is good because we do talk about Dhyan Chohans, which are the highest, or some of the highest ranking individuals in the leadership of the earth, and then also planetary spirits, which we mentioned as well. So let's hear the explanation. Are they gods? This is going to be interesting.
And he says, yes, our reasons may be briefly summed up thus. So Dhyan Chohans, just to recapitulate, are, as Paul said, the highest members of the spiritual hierarchy of our universe and of our solar system and of our planetary system, of our planet. But there are huge gradations, at least 12, and those depend on their level of consciousness and achievement. So, for example, those who are Dhyan Chohans may have trillions of years of experience. They may have quintillions of years of experience. We don't know. It's pure speculation, but they are far, far, far in advance of us as humans on the earth today. We have a few million years of experience, maybe a billion, but we certainly don't have anywhere close to the experience that they have. He has told us previously that universal mind is the sum total of all of the consciousness, awareness, and experience of these Dhyan Chohans. In essence, they are nature itself. They are natural law itself. They are not beings like you and I are. And we've pointed out before, they don't interact except in extremely rare instances with human beings. The ones who do interact once in a while with human beings are the Mahatmas. Why? Because they are the ones who most recently graduated from the human kingdom.
Let's make a distinction, though. The Mahatmas are not Dhyan Chohans.
No.
Let's make that distinction.
They've got a long, long way to go.
Right.
That's why he said, we are not gods. And our chiefs, they hope they're not gods either. They're still on their way.
Now, the chiefs he's referring to might not even be the Dhyan Chohans either.
He's
Chohans.
talking about Chohans, the Maha Chohan and the higher levels of Mahatmaship,
Yes.
adeptship.
And we've also referenced in this video the rankings or offices of Christ and Buddha. They're not considered Dhyan Chohans either.
Remember that we have humanity graduating from humanity as the goal for the fourth round. When we talked about the different rounds, the fourth round was all about getting the human experience and being ready to go to the next, which is adeptship. The fifth round, and the next one, do you remember? Sixth round is Buddha, becoming a Buddha. And the seventh round, Dhyan Chohan. So those are billions of years in the future.
Mm-hmm. One. Now, does this number one refer to the one?
Their reasons. These are their reasons why they believe in Dhyan Chohans or planetary spirits and endow them with a universal mind.
Right. Earlier, the point that he wanted to clarify where he said, we deny the existence of a thinking, conscious God. Now, this is in response to that, yes. We deny the absurd proposition that there can be, even in a boundless and eternal universe, two infinite, eternal, and omnipresent existences.
And we went over this quite extensively in our last session. If something is omnipresent and eternal, infinite, you can't have two of them because everything is included.
Omnipresent means everywhere.
Yes.
Infinitely everywhere. How can there be anything else besides that?
Right, exactly. So that's the first premise.
In other words, if the universe itself is omnipresent, how can there be a God that's also omnipresent? It doesn't make sense.
No.
Okay, and then number 2, he's relating to his second point earlier. Matter. We know to be eternal, that is, having had no beginning. A, because matter is nature herself. And B, because that which cannot annihilate itself and is indestructible necessarily exists. Therefore, it could not begin to exist, nor can it cease to exist. And C, because the accumulated experience of countless ages and that of exact science shows us that matter, or nature, acts by her own peculiar energy, of which not any atom is ever in an absolute state of rest, and therefore must have always existed, its materials ever changing in form, combinations, and properties, but its principles or elements being absolutely indestructible.
So matter, he's saying, has always existed. It will always exist. It didn't have a beginning. It will not have an end. Now, here's the question, though. How can you have matter that comes into existence during the Manvantara and disappears? How can you have spirit and matter? And this is what he's saying. There is no spirit. Everything is matter. Because you can call it whatever word you want. Spirit, matter, bubblegum. It's all one.
You could also say the opposite. There's no matter and everything is spirit.
Exactly. So it doesn't matter which term you use. It is all one. But in its eternal manifestation, there is something. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but it is material. So it is a type of matter. And during the pralaya, it all gets reabsorbed into the absolute, but the matter is still there in space. All of the energy, all of the potential is collected. And then when the Manvantara starts again, boom, it is reanimated.
We'll reference our couple of charts in our book, and one of the charts is the gradation of spirit versus matter, but there's no verses. It's a smooth gradation from what we believe is hard, solid stuff to what we can't touch with our physical bodies. There's no delineation. There's no actual point, a line where matter becomes spirit and spirit becomes matter.
Yeah, so matter always exists. Mm-hmm. There is coming and going in its manifestation, levels of manifestation. Yes, that can vary.
3. That's funny. There is no number 3 in his little introductory paragraph, but there's a number 3 in his response. Okay, they're not directly connected. Okay. As to God, since no one has ever seen him or it, well, people would argue that. Some people would say they have seen God.
Yeah.
Some people would say they have.
There's a funny thing in the Old Testament. Remember when Moses went to see God on Mount Sinai and received supposedly the tablets with the 10 Commandments? He saw God as a burning bush, which is actually quite significant. But when he wanted to actually see God, he only saw the backside of God. A funny thing from the Old Testament, if you want to read that.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Since no one has ever seen him or it, unless he or it is the very essence and nature of this boundless eternal matter, its energy and motion, we cannot regard him as either eternal or infinite, or even self-existing. We refuse to admit the existence of a being of which we know absolutely nothing, Because A, there's no room for him in the presence of that matter whose undeniable properties and qualities we know thoroughly well. B, because if he or it is but a part of that matter, it is ridiculous to maintain that he is the mover and ruler of that of which he is but a dependent part. And C, because if they tell us that God is a self-existent, pure spirit, independent of matter, an extra-cosmic deity, we answer that admitting even the possibility of such an impossibility, that is, his existence, we yet hold that a purely immaterial spirit cannot be an intelligent, conscious ruler, nor can he have any of the attributes bestowed upon him by theology, and thus such a God becomes again but a blind force.
Remember in the last session, he told us that they only teach that which they know, that they have experienced themselves. These occult scientists have studied these things. You cannot become a Mahatma without a high degree of intelligence. Intelligence alone won't get you there, though. You can have a high degree of intelligence and be extremely selfish and use it for selfish purposes. You can't become a Mahatma without both intelligence and getting rid of ego and getting rid of selfishness.
I find it interesting, Terry, that he says, we hold that a purely immaterial spirit cannot be an intelligent, conscious ruler. This is interesting. Again, there's much more here than he's saying in words. Immaterial spirit. The devas are potentially immaterial spirits. Immaterial, meaning there's nothing material about it. Okay, I get that. Outside of the cosmic scheme, extra cosmic deity. I hear what he's saying. It's just interesting.
He's trying to state what Christians believe as far as God. And he's saying, we can't make sense of that. There's nothing in our knowledge which would correlate to that.
I'm trying to place myself into a listener who has not been exposed to these things before. I might think that, hey, we just got done saying that there are these Dhyan Chohans that are immaterial spirits too.
He didn't say that they were immaterial.
So what is the difference?
You can't have it both ways.
So
he's saying that Christians claim that you can have spirit separate from matter, and that cannot work.
Okay, that clears it up then.
Okay.
That makes sense. Intelligence, as found in our Dhyan Chohans, now this is probably going to answer the question that I just asked.
Maybe.
Intelligence, as found in our Dhyan Chohans, is a faculty that can belong only to an animated being, however invisible may be the materials of their organizations.
There you go. There you go.
And plus, please remember, and I want to always remind everyone of this, the Dhyan Chohans didn't start off as Dhyan Chohans. Dhyan Chohans started as rocks, as something very, very basic, and got to that level through work, really, through experience. I have not heard that attributed to religion's gods. They just always kind of were that. The type of intelligence that the Dhyan Chohans have, they acquired through experience.
Yes, they had to go through every possible permutation of existence.
That's why they're as smart as they are.
That makes sense to me.
And there was never a time, as far as we know, when there were no Dhyan Chohans. So that is a conundrum. How do you do that?
That takes the blender into my brain and mixes it up.
That's beyond our level of understanding and beyond theirs. He'll say at some point, I don't think in this letter, that as far as they know, there is no end, there is no beginning to anything. But how do you prove that?
Intelligence requires the ability to think. To think, one must have ideas. Ideas assume senses, which are physically material. And how can anything material belong to pure spirit?
Yeah.
If it be objected that thought cannot be a property of matter, we will ask why. We must have an unanswerable proof of this assumption before we can accept it. We would inquire of the theologian, what is to prevent his God, since he is the alleged creator of all, from endowing matter with the faculty of thought? And when answered that evidently it has not pleased him to do so, that it is a mystery as well as an impossibility, we would insist upon being told why it is more impossible that matter should produce spirit and thought than that spirit or the thought of God should produce and create matter. Wow, okay.
His ability to reason is beyond mine.
Yeah,
Right.
well, that's incredible. The only part that really makes sense to me is the last part. He's saying, why would it be more impossible that matter could produce spirit and thought than that spirit, purely spirit, should produce and create matter? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's rather complicated, and my brain is rather limited.
We do not bow our heads in the dust before the mystery of the mind, for we have solved it ages ago. Rejecting with contempt the theistic theory, we reject equally the automaton theory, teaching that states of consciousness are produced by the marshalling of the molecules of the brain, and we feel just as little respect for that other hypothesis, the production of molecular motion by consciousness.
And the automaton theory was, again, one of the things that Spinoza believed in. But in this case, it was something that they reject. The automaton theory was basically the same principle that scientists believe, that intelligence just came into being automatically somehow, a fortuitous confluence of events that maybe some kind of a spark, all of a sudden a degree of intelligence sprang up. They reject that idea.
I've thought about that many, many times. The Darwinian theory of how organic materials in some pond somewhere got struck by lightning and all of a sudden an amoeba sprung into existence. And
Actually became a human.
yeah.
We believe something very similar, but not that it just happens by chance.
We do believe that supposed inanimate objects do have intelligence, but the jump from that existence to a living thing, that's
But
a
here's the
stretch.
difference. If, in fact, the Dhyan Chohans are nature itself, natural law, it makes sense. The intelligence is there all along, or the potential intelligence.
So Darwin could be right. I think we have to pull from several sources. I don't think our little brains are able to understand.
Unlike them, we do not have enough experience yet to state this is the way it is.
Then what do we believe in? Yeah, tell us what you believe in.
Tell us.
Well, we believe in the much laughed at phlogiston. See article, What is Force and What is Matter in the Theosophist for September 1882. Did he write that? Did KH put that there, or did someone make a note of that?
He wrote that.
Okay. And in what some natural philosophers would call nisus, the incessant, though perfectly imperceptible to the ordinary senses, motion or efforts that one body is making on another, the pulsations of inert matter, its life.
All right, we have two things here. What is phlogiston? The much laughed at theory of phlogiston, which they believe in. Phlogiston was an idea that everything that is combustible, organic, has this energy, this principle in it called phlogiston. And that when you burn it, then the phlogiston creates the flame, and you're only left with matter that now contains no phlogiston. Well, the Mahatmas don't believe in it quite that way. But phlogiston could be said to be another form of Fohat. Remember when he talked about the 5 elements? What are the 5 elements of the alchemists? Earth, water, air, fire, and ether. And they absolutely believe that. Now, scientists would laugh if you told them that you believe in the 5 elements that the alchemists believe in. He says, we absolutely believe in that. Fire, remember, he said, on every level has a different aspect, a different way of manifesting. So fire, as a form of phlogiston, exists in matter. He said, and I don't understand it. I don't have enough insight or ability. I don't have the cities that they have to investigate that. But he says they believe in that. And then nisus. Nisus is this innate need to express, to grow, to develop, to evolve. Very simple. He says, we believe that every particle of existence has nisus, this desire to improve.
That's a foundational concept in most yoga philosophies, the divine will, it could be said. And we talk about that in our book, in the concept of the prodigal son in the first part of our book. And HBB has referenced this too. I'm not going to quote it accurately, but when asked, why does the Big Bang bang, or why does manifestation happen in the first place? There's a desire, there's a will to be.
Yeah.
There's some kind of divine force.
And that's why we say desire is not bad. It's your motive that can be good or bad, good or evil. So everything has desire, including the Dhyan Chohans.
We want to live, we want to expand, we want to grow, just natural for us. The bodies of the planetary spirits are formed of that which priestly and others call phlogiston, and for which we have another name. This essence, in its highest 7th state, forming that matter of which the organisms of the highest and purest Dhyan Chohans are composed, and in its lowest or densest form, so impalpable still that science calls it energy and force, serving as a cover to the planetaries of the first or lowest degree.
Now, when he says planetaries of the first or lowest degrees, remember there are 2 kingdoms that he didn't even talk about. We first talked about mineral kingdom. But before that, there are 2 levels of elementary kingdoms. And those are the ones that he said, I would be embarrassed to even try to explain what they are.
Wow.
So that's what he's referring to. And all of them are animated by phlogiston in its various different forms.
In other words, we believe in matter alone, in matter as visible nature, and matter in its invisibility as the invisible, omnipresent, omnipotent, proteus, with its unceasing motion, which is its life, and which nature draws from herself, since she is the great whole, outside of which nothing can exist.
Whole spelled W-H-O-L-E.
Like Whole Foods.
Yeah.
He is eloquent here. He gets very poetic sometimes.
Yes.
In other words, we believe in matter alone, in matter as visible nature, and matter in its invisibility as the invisible, omnipresent, omnipotent, proteus, with its unceasing motion, which is its life, and which nature draws from herself, since she is the great whole, outside of which nothing can exist.
And proteus meaning malleable, changeable, that can adapt.
It's a proper noun?
Not normally,
Oh, okay.
but he's elevating that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. I like how he says matter that we see, matter that we don't see. Spirit is still matter, he's saying. Omnipresent, omnipotent, with its unceasing motion, which is its life.
Mm-hmm.
Nature is alive because it moves and it changes. Even when it's in pralaya, something is still vibrating in a certain way. And there's still something.
There's still some kind of a hum and buzz. Yes.
Do we need to say who Priestley is? We mentioned a name earlier. Have we mentioned him?
I didn't look up any more than his ideas on phlogiston. He was the one that came up with that.
You did say that. Sorry. And then we have another person here. As Billfinger truly asserts that Motion is a manner of existence that flows necessarily out of the essence of matter, that matter moves by its own peculiar energies, that its motion is due to the force which is inherent in itself, that the variety of motion and phenomena that result proceed from the diversity of the properties of the qualities and of the combinations which are originally found in the primitive matter, of which nature is the assemblage, and of which your science knows less than one of our Tibetan yak drivers knows of Kant's metaphysics. That's funny. That was one of his long run-on sentences, though.
All right. Jorg Bernhard Billfinger, 1693 to 1750, was a German philosopher, a mathematician and statesman, and the son of a Lutheran minister. But he obviously didn't take so much of a Christian stance on what the universe is like and proposed more of a scientific version, according to K.H. So some of these philosophers were beginning to renounce their ties to religion and to embrace scientific ideas of 1882, actually long before that, because all of these people that he referenced were from the 1600s and 1700s, and that was the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. So, yeah, things are changing, and today, every year, we have fewer and fewer people who trust in religion to tell them about how the world works. And it's not a bad thing.
The existence of matter, then, is a fact. The existence of motion is another fact. And their self-existence and indestructibility is a third fact. The idea of pure spirit as a being or an existence, give it whatever name you want, it's an absurdity.
Yeah. So they don't believe in pure spirit. It would be meaningless and it makes no sense.
Would the Christian doctrine teach that God's physical aspect is us? If we're his children, that they might say, well, he's the spirit, we're the matter part.
They don't have a consolidated statement. Each group has a different way of explaining things, and none of them really coordinate.
Was it Einstein who talked about the only two constants in the universe are matter and motion? Or am I saying that right?
I think he said the only two things that are infinite are the universe and stupidity.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm not so sure about the universe.
Did he really say that?
I don't know. So I read that just this morning.
Oh my God. That's hilarious.
Now, this is something we can really sink our teeth into, finally. This is...
our ideas on evil.
Ooh, evil.
All right, buckle up. Evil, drum roll, please. Can we get a drum roll? Evil has no existence per se, and is but the absence of good, and exists only for him who is made its victim.
Ooh, it only exists for him who is made its victim. There is no evil in nature. We're going to find out where it comes from then.
It proceeds from two causes. So, but back up. He says evil has no existence per se.
Yes.
Again, don't take everything he says exactly literally. No independent existence outside. In other words, there's no devil. There's no ultimate source of the evil. And we'll find out what he means by that. That's why he says per se. So this is a good contemplation. If you're into contemplating, take that and contemplate it.
Yes. And when the Manvantara started and everything started to separate between the two poles, it wasn't that one was good and one was bad. You could have male, female, positive, negative.
Light and dark. It doesn't imply
light,
that
dark.
one's good and bad. It's just opposite.
None of that makes it good or bad.
Okay, let's keep going. It, meaning evil, proceeds from two causes, and no more than good is it an independent cause in nature. Nature is devoid of goodness or malice. Just like what Terry said, it's neutral. She follows only immutable laws when she either gives life and joy or sends suffering and death, and destroys what she has created.
But she doesn't send life, she doesn't send joy and death. Those are our perceptions.
We perceive it, we label it.
Even in one of his plays, Shakespeare said, "Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so."
Yep. We're the drama creators.
Yes.
Nature's chill.
Yeah, think about animals. They don't freak out just because something happens to them. They assess the situation and they do what they can, but they don't sit there and say, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And after whatever happens, they still don't worry about it. They work with nature. They're a natural being. Let's see who is not a natural being.
Right. Exactly.
Out of tune with nature.
Right. Nature has an antidote for every poison, and her laws have a reward for every suffering.
That's very interesting. Her laws have a reward for every suffering. There are two things you can say about suffering. Things that we have merited that causes pain. Yes, that's one. And the reward for that is you get to learn something, what you did to cause your suffering. There are times, too, when your suffering comes from something someone else did, and you did nothing to merit that. So, yeah, that's a different type. You're still going to suffer, but you did nothing to cause it. This is what I learned just the other day by reading The Key to Theosophy. HPB said, "It is during Devachan when all unmerited suffering is recompensed." That is one of the reasons why Devachan can be so long. We had a session years ago, right after Sandy Hook. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
And it was a community that was only a few miles away from there. And the people were just
shaken,
devastated by the event that took place and tried to make sense of it. We tried as best we could to do it, but now we have more insight and we can explain it a little better. One thing is we have to remember that every single person born comes with a bag of karma. No matter how cute and how innocent they look, they have karma from previous lifetimes that is going to determine events that happen to them in life. Some of those people may be destined to die a violent death. That is not an accident. It's by karma. It's normal. It's natural. Some of those people who are killed in acts of violence did nothing in a previous life to merit that. And it's the Dhyan Chohans who are specifically assigned to that realm of everyone's Devachan who has experienced that sort of thing. Pain and suffering that is not from their own causation. And that will be recompensed in Devachan. You never experience anything but what nature evens out, the cause of that.
We've spent countless of our sessions talking about that, and the accidents, even though we did spend a lot of time on that, they are still the exception to the rule. The accidents are more rare. Usually it's karmically related.
One other thing that might help a little bit is to look at how animals do that. What did a gazelle on the savannah in Africa do to merit being killed and eaten by a lion? Nothing. They don't have karma. And if you've ever watched these nature shows, you see that they struggle desperately to get away from the predator. And at some point, if they're overtaken, they will still fight. But when they know that it's inevitable, they relax.
They do. Something in them understands something.
Yeah.
They don't have an ego like we do that says, shouldn't be this way. Not fair.
It's the thinking principle that creates all of that. So in a sense, ignorance is bliss, but we can't remain that way forever.
Back to the Sandy Hook thing. When the people that witness tremendous hardships and the people who are affected by it in other ways, like our students who are with us that live nearby, they're there for a reason too. Their karma required them to experience that for some type of lesson. We all need to see things and experience things, whether it's actually being the victim of violence or being near it or having it around us. The world works for a reason. There's a reason why evil exists, because we'll hear, but there's always a lesson in it. So karma is always working out, even for the people who aren't directly involved.
And it doesn't help to be a Pollyanna, to ignore everything evil around us. We're surrounded by evil. We have to admit that, or we should admit that. And you can protect yourself from evil people more effectively if you are aware of it. Look around you at the people you deal with every day. Some of them have very nefarious intentions, and you're liable to become a victim of those intentions if you're not careful. We all have to be careful, just like the animals on the savanna in Africa. We have to be aware of our surroundings and of possible danger.
After we hear there's a reward for every suffering, he says, the butterfly devoured by a bird becomes that bird, and the little bird killed by another animal goes into a higher form. Not directly, though. He's speaking very generally. The butterfly will reincarnate, not necessarily as a bird right away, but at some point, yeah, it will. It will be a bird,
well,
perhaps.
I think he's actually saying that that life force goes into that next animal to aid it.
No, that's true. That is true, actually.
And then the bigger one comes along.
True.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It is the blind law of necessity and the eternal fitness of things, and hence cannot be called evil in nature. That seems to make perfect sense. It's not evil. The tiger or lion on the African savanna is not evil for eating the gazelle. That's just that's what they do.
They can't eat grass, but gazelles can eat grass and grow from that. They can eat the meat that was formed out of that grass by the gazelle, and that's how they survive.
Not evil.
It's nature in progress.
Mm-hmm. The real evil proceeds from human intelligence. Now, that's the kicker right there. The real evil proceeds from human intelligence, and its origin rests entirely with reasoning man who dissociates himself from nature. That's it. We can mic drop right there and end.
We can go home. Oh, wait.
Yeah, you are home. The real evil proceeds from human intelligence, and its origin rests entirely with reasoning man who dissociates himself from nature. In other words, when you don't understand how nature works, you're a little bit more evil than someone who is in tune with nature. Why would you hurt someone if you are in tune with nature?
And people like to talk about sin. Sin is something that some God says you must not do, or you will be punished. I will punish you. That isn't it at all. Sin is very simple. It's acting contrary to nature.
It is.
Nothing else.
This is an example of why religions actually are good for millions of people. Some people won't even consider or try or be able to or have the capacity to understand what we're saying in that being in sync with nature. What does that even mean? I'm going to go turn on Fox News or something else. I'm not going to listen to theosophy. You know what I mean? Like, most people won't want to even try to understand this, the cycles of nature. How do I possibly get in sync with nature? If someone doesn't want to try to figure that out, they need to be told by the priest, don't cheat on your wife, don't kill someone. Oh, that makes sense to me, and they might be a good person then. So that's an example of how that does need to be there for some people. But for most of us who are watching this, this makes so much more sense. Follow the laws of nature. Of course, you're not going to murder someone because they looked at you funny. That doesn't seem natural, right? That's probably out of sync with nature. And Terry summed it up in another easy way. Sinning or doing something bad or evil is anything that's out of sync with the evolution of nature, with the pulsation of the world around us.
And that automatically assumes that you recognize the oneness of everything. If you really, truly believe that, you will never, ever commit a sin.
Yeah, exactly. Humanity alone, then. Oh my God. Humanity alone, then, is the true source of evil.
It isn't anything lower. It isn't anything higher. It's human being.
Don't blame the devil. There is no devil. Sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
the devil is you.
It's our ego, really. It could be. But don't blame an entity. You can be possessed. We have talked about the brothers of the shadow, and you could be being controlled. That's an exception to the rule. But this is the juice. Humanity creates evil by our choices. Evil is the exaggeration of good, the offspring of human selfishness and greed.
Yeah. The people who commit evil are convinced that they're doing something good because it's good for me.
Mm.
They don't take into account that it may not be good for anybody else. That doesn't matter.
Think profoundly, and you will find that, except for death, which is not evil, but a necessary law, and accidents, which will always find their reward in a future life or in Devachan too, the origin of every evil, whether small or great, is in human action, in man, whose intelligence makes him the one free agent in nature. That's another kicker. That's a huge concept here.
Man is the only free agent who can do whatever the heck he pleases.
We can choose to go against natural law. Animals don't really understand evil. They don't really understand being mean. They just do what they're naturally doing. Yeah, they have to kill another animal to eat.
Yeah. And even the Mahatmas are not free agents because they have to follow very strict rules, but they do it willingly. Mm-hmm. They understand that there are very good reasons for those rules. Mm-hmm. So, no, they're not going to deviate from that. They're not going to say, yeah, well, I happen to want this to happen, so I'm going to make it happen with my cities. No, they're not allowed to do that.
Another way to look at this is that humanity is at the bottom of the materiality cycle, if you will. We've mentioned the cyclic nature of spirit, of divinity descending into matter, and animals are more spiritual than humans in many ways. Even children are more spiritual than adults in many ways. We as human adults are the most materialistic. We're the most separate feeling, and that's why we have the most ability to go against nature, because we're separate. Now, masters are on the upward arc again. They're more spiritual. They're more connected. They know everything is one at its core. Most of us don't know that. We forget it. We don't realize it. We don't believe it. And that's why we're able to hurt people, because it doesn't feel real to us that we're all connected in the inner planes. We're all the same life.
Once you understand it, life is really, really simple. But getting to that point of understanding how it works takes some real effort.
It is not nature that creates diseases, but man.
Whoa.
Really?
Say that again.
It is not nature that creates diseases, but man.
Wow.
How can that be the case?
How can that be the case? Think about this. With our advanced science today, you would think that we had a cure for every single disease. But guess what? No sooner do they find a cure for one disease than nature comes up with another one. Why is that? Because people are out of tune with nature. The Mahatmas don't have diseases, illness, because they are in tune with nature. Very simple. If you have disease, it's from being out of tune in this lifetime or a previous lifetime. But you have to figure out where you are out of tune. That's the goal, is to figure out what you need to do differently. And it usually has to do with your thought process.
An interesting contemplation. I know this is deep stuff. Think about the planet Earth without humans, with every other life form except for humans. What kind of energies would exist? There wouldn't be any wars. There wouldn't be any jealousy. There might be some. Peacocks are jealous of the other peacock that has better feathers, maybe. There's a little bit of jealousy there. But think about evil existing. How could there be evil without humans?
It would be an absolute paradise.
I mean, bacteria would exist. Animals and trees might get sick.
But they don't fret about it. It's just they die at some point and get reborn again.
I mean, I wonder if a virus would exist. I mean, viruses are
Sure,
natural.
they're part of nature.
So there might be diseases, but not the same kind that we have today.
No, not at all.
The latter's mission and destiny in the economy of nature is to die his natural death brought by old age.
That's what we should do.
Except for accidents, neither a primitive man nor a wild animal dies of disease. Wow.
Very, very
I
interesting.
wonder what science would say about that.
They would disagree, absolutely. They are convinced that that would not be true.
Right. Food, drink, sexual relations are all natural necessities of life. But excess in them brings on disease, misery, suffering, both mental and physical, and the latter are transmitted as the greatest evils to future generations, the progeny of the culprits. This is so
He
good.
mentions three things specifically: food.
drink, sexual relations.
Yeah. So obviously, those are three very big ones.
Wow.
Our desires that are not in sync with nature. That's what causes disease and suffering.
This is such practical info. This is
Yes.
right here.
Yes, that's why I said we can really sink our teeth into this.
You've heard Terry and I say many times about taking this metaphysical flashlight and shining it into all areas of ourselves. Just for 1 minute, maybe pause the video just for 1 minute, and don't be hard on yourself, but for 1 minute, take your flashlight and shine it into yourself and look at the types of food that you eat just for a minute. Just look at it, no judgment, just observe it with the light. Look at what kinds of drinks you drink and look at your sexual relations. Just do it for a second and be honest about what you see. That can give you clues, like the biggest clues on what changes are needed in your life to reduce some suffering.
And this is why I showed you those photos at the beginning of very simple people in North India practicing Tibetan Buddhism every day in their life. Simple people, kind, very, very little suffering, very little pain, because they're living in sync with nature. They're not fighting wars. They're not stealing, robbing. He said they have no insane asylums in Tibet and no prisons. They don't need them.
Wow.
Not in 1882.
This is so fascinating, and I want to share so many things. I do get asked the question a lot, what do you mean live in sync with nature? Here's a really simple way to live in sync with nature. Of course, you can do what Terry just said and look at the people in northern India. Another thing, if you've ever been to Sedona, Arizona, and if you enjoy architecture and building and things, Sedona tries to live in sync with nature, and here's how they do it. There are very strict building codes on the types of buildings that can be built, how tall they are, what materials are used, the color of them, the types of lighting that are used inside and outside of the buildings. Seriously, they want to kind of have their town not so harsh on nature. They want to blend in with the environment. That's one very, very, very simple way that you can do that. But you can do it every day when you walk outside. Do you step on plants and kill them, or do you walk on a path instead of hurting the plant? Like, easy things, right? It doesn't have to be super crazy profound.
I grew up in northern Arizona on a ranch with Route 66 running right through the middle of it in the 1950s. It was quiet. Even with the road a quarter of a mile from the house, it wasn't that noisy. And you could look up at the sky at night and see billions and billions of stars.
Not anymore, huh?
Not anymore. Now there's a power plant next door that has a railroad siding with giant Klieg lights all night long. There are trains coming in and leaving. The traffic is horrendous, and you cannot see the stars anymore, even out in the middle of nowhere.
Some people have told me, pushed back on this, and you might be thinking this, how does light pollution or how does building with the surrounding environment, how does that help you become enlightened, or how does that help you reduce suffering? Contemplate it. Contemplate being in sync versus out of sync. Think about if we had a paved parking lot over the entire planet. Could that be good for the planet? It's an exaggeration, of course, but could that be good for our breath? How many plants would be providing oxygen? Just think about these things. You'll figure it out. These are just clues and,
Yeah, it's a long, long process, but hopefully you will start somewhere. Many people are never going to learn this lesson. It's just the way it is.
I know.
Some people are going to fight their entire existence trying to make the universe work the way they want it to work. It's a losing proposition, but go for it if that's the way you want to live your life.
Ambition, the desire of securing happiness and comfort for those we love by obtaining honors and riches, are praiseworthy, natural feelings, but when they transform man into an ambitious, cruel tyrant, a miser, a selfish egotist, they bring untold misery on those around him, on nations, as well as on individuals.
Yeah.
We all know these people.
Look at the capitalistic billionaires. Guess who they care about? Do they care about you? We would like to think they do, but guess what? Take a look at their actual ambitions and projects. They care about one thing and one thing only. And millions of people revere these billionaires. Ooh, I want to be just like that. Think about it again. Think about it 10 times.
Mm-hmm. I do appreciate that he started that sentence by saying, it's okay to be ambitious. Obviously, you need to have will. Just like we said earlier, desire and will is okay, but notice what you're going towards. The desire for securing happiness and comfort for those we love by obtaining honors and riches could be praiseworthy and they're natural. But when they transform people into cruel tyrants, that's when they are evil. This is now evil at this point. This is the human ego and mind changing.
It's your intention and why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. All these, then, food, wealth, ambition, and 1,000 other things we haven't mentioned, become the source and cause of evil, whether in its excess or through its absence. Become a glutton, a pervert, a tyrant. Wow, he used the word pervert. That's interesting. That was even a word back then. Wow.
He did use a different word. I forget what it was.
Okay. Become a glutton, a pervert, a tyrant, and you become the originator of diseases, of human suffering and misery. Wow, you wouldn't want to be the cause of suffering and misery, would you? But people are, people do.
Yeah, they do, but they block it out.
Yeah, they ignore it. It is neither nature nor an imaginary deity that has to be blamed, but human nature made vile by selfishness.
Nothing else. Selfishness. So these people obviously don't believe in the oneness of all, or they wouldn't do it. It's like every man for himself and the devil take the hindermost.
You know, this idea of the exaggerated forms of ambition. Think of some of the worst people that have lived, like the Adolf Hitler types. How exaggerated was his ambition? Mm-hmm. Moderation. We need to have ambition. You got to go get a job. You have to provide food. The tiger or lion has to have ambition to go kill the gazelle, or else he's going to die too. So some ambition is necessary, but look at the exaggerated forms of it. It's clear, right? It becomes clear.
If your ambition is based on selfishness, fear, greed, hatred, anger, you're on the wrong side.
Yeah. This letter, number 88, is one of the richest in our entire teaching here. And it'll be taking us, 3 sessions. This is the second session, and we will end here. And we have approximately, I'd say, a quarter of the letter left to go through. So we'll wrap up this session. Comment, give us some thoughts, and as you see us do, we mention your thoughts and questions too, and we can discuss some of these things if you'd like. Please contemplate these. This is very transformational, or it has the potential to be very transformational.
And this is the very reason that we're doing this series, to get practical information from these very wise, advanced beings who are sharing this knowledge with us This is exactly what they want us to do, is to try to understand what they're teaching and learn to put it into practice and to share it with other people. That's the most important part of the process, sharing it with others so that we lift everybody up.
See you in the next session.